Good morning, everybody. Welcome to another week on LinkedIn. If you don't know me, my name is Jeff. I do these videos once a week as a way of paying it forward to the design community that I've been a member of for 25 years. And to remind people, hey, I'm available for any kind of like executive design advising that you might need at your company. So last week, I saw a post on LinkedIn that was kind of calling out user personas and saying, like, I've never had a client ask for a user persona. I'm not sure of the value of user personas. Anyone who knows me knows I'm actually a huge fan of these, but I thought I'd talk about why and what the value is in case it's not something you're clear about. So when we think about the knowledge we have of a user, if we have zero user research, it's going to be all intuition based. It's going to be, I think they act like this. They might act like that. That's kind of like the beginning. And I mean, human beings can have good intuition. It's possible that you might make some right decisions based off of that, but the risk is a lot higher that you might not. So then we introduce user research to kind of reduce the risk of our intuition being wrong. That's why we do user research, to reduce the risk of being incorrect by either illuminating areas we need to focus on or eliminating areas that we don't need to focus on. And that really can kind of come in two ways. One is kind of like first research, primary research, whatever you call it, where you're going to go out and you're actually going to talk to users. You're going to collect information about them. And the other is secondary. You're going to take advantage of research that exists in the world. And also in that, you're going to have kind of observational research. In this day and age, observational research means something different than when I started. When I started, it was really about go out and watch somebody. These days, the tools that we have for the analytics to understand like click-through paths and user behavior, session length, all these types of things. This is information that can help guide us to understand what users are doing. And then we can do a lot of more like in-person user interview type research studies to understand the whys. Why are people doing the things that they're doing? Within that space, something interesting starts to happen is you start to notice you have different kinds of users. And when you're intuitive based, maybe you thought about that, but it's really hard to ignore when you're like, hey, everyone acts really differently, but this group of people and that group of people and that group of people, they're almost acting as a cluster. And that's what we would call a segment. So you start to build these profiles, this data that tells you everything about a segment. You know roughly how old they are. You know where in the country or in the world they might live. You know their kind of regular usage behaviors. Through user research, you might even know some psychographics and like what drives them, what motivates them, what they like, what they dislike. At that point, you have, I mean, it's an ever-growing like library of information, but you've got real information about people, and you're no longer going to be making intuitive-based decisions. You're going to be making data-based decisions. At that point, you have enough to move forward, and you can be very successful without going the third step, which is to a user persona. So user profile, library of information about a particular user segment. A user persona is going to be mostly fictional. Sometimes people like to use real people they've interviewed. I kind of shy away from that. But a fictional representation of who that segment is. You give them a name, you give them a backstory, you kind of set the stage a little bit about who they are. So the question that I saw in this post last week is, nobody asked for that. Why is that valuable? Why should we do that? So the idea of user personas actually goes back to a guy named Alan Cooper who wrote The Inmates Are Running the Asylum long before I even started in this industry, which was this idea that if you don't root who you're working for in somewhat of a real human being, it's really easy for bias to creep in. He referred to that as the elastic user. It's like, well, they might want to do that. Well, they might want to do that. Yeah, we have that data, but they might want to do this. And when bias starts to creep in like that, sometimes it's little decisions. Sometimes it's big ones about what should be the main epic we're going to work on this coming season. And so the idea of a user persona was created to fight that bias. So it's a tool really of empathy, But a lot of days, people think empathy just means caring about the other person. It's really about empathy in terms of being able to see the world through someone else's eyes and really perceive everything that way. So if you find yourself in a place where your body of user research information, whether it's coming from your systems, whether it's coming from primary research or secondary research, you're like, we know who the users are and we don't struggle to use that data to make the best decisions, you might not need a user persona for what you're working on. Breaks my heart. I love doing them just because they're fun for me. But if you find yourself going, listen, we have all this data, but we keep making these decisions that are more about our own biases or more about like what we think people would want. And we keep getting it wrong. Like we keep having to go back and our initial hypotheses keep getting proved wrong. Even if we had this data, it just didn't factor as much into the decision-making process as was it supposed to. That's when a user persona can be a really useful tool, because then it's no longer about users might. It's about Becky will. And that's where the value comes. So I understand why a client's never asked for it. And I understand why it might not be valuable to you. But if you find yourself in that position where it's really hard to kind of get out of your own way, it can be a really impactful tool to help you kind of empathize more with the real user and get out of your own bias. Aside from that, there are also useful tools in other situations. So if you're doing ideation and you want to kind of like tell the story of someone's day using user scenarios or user stories, not kind of like the agile user stories, but a story about a user, it can open up creativity if you're talking about a real person as opposed to just a vague human being. So it can have value in those other areas, and I enjoy using them in those spaces, but this is the main goal. So to that person who asked that question on LinkedIn a week ago, of like, what's the point? That's the point of user persona, and that's probably the best case scenario for when you'd want to use one. So with that, my name is Jeff. I hope you all have a great week. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask. Cheers. Bye.